Greetings, metalheads, and welcome to No Nonsense Metal Reviews. I'm George, and today I'm back with another metal head-to-head, pinning two albums head-to-head, two albums from the same band for seemingly no reason. Something I started doing a little while back. Actually, it has been a little while since I've done one of these style of reviews. Started off with Immortal, pitting Battles in the North against At the Heart of Winter. Then went to Cannibal Corpse for Eaten Back to Life against Vile. And actually, it was that Cannibal Corpse metal head-to-head that gave me the inspiration for the latest match, the latest showdown. This time, we are sticking with a homegrown band from here in the UK. We're talking the Godfathers of Grind, the pioneers, Napalm Death. A legendary band, a fantastic band. Absolutely love Napalm Death to bits. They are, as I say, the Godfathers of Grind. So influential to that whole grindcore and crust and also death metal movement. Extreme music in general. Napalm Death have had one of the biggest impacts of any band on that kind of scene. Incorporating punk and extreme metal and all those good flavours in between, and producing something absolutely formidable. So this first contender is actually the second album from 1988. This is From Enslavement to Obliteration. This is a very interesting album that actually, it took me a long time to get into it. The first album of Napalm Death I heard was actually the debut, Scum. And I've said before, although I've grown to love Scum, first time I heard it, I must have been around 13, 14. I did not know what to make of it. I had no idea what the hell I was listening to. And to be honest, I was not interested. It took me a few years. I had to put that one down and pick it up a few years later when my extreme music taste had honed a little bit more. Had to leave that, picked it up again, fell in love with it. A little while after that, came across this ditty, and this is a nice reissued digipack, courtesy of course from Earache Records, the legendary, the home of these bands, of course. And it took me a while to get into it. It took me a while, but over, I don't know, maybe the last 5 or so years, I've really grown to love From Enslavement to Obliteration. I think it is such a benchmark album. It's such a hugely important album, but it's an absolute beast of an album. It is still grindcore. There's no getting away from that. You know, it was a couple of years or a year or so after the debut. This was released in 1988. The lineup at this time was the second and last album to feature Lee Dorian on vocals, who of course went on to become frontman and vocalist of Cathedral and other projects as well. It's also the last album to feature the legendary Bill Steer before his departure on guitars to then join and lead the way with the mighty Carcass. But we did have Mick Harris on drums, the absolute machine, and the legendary Shane Embry on bass. And what I love about From Enslavement to Obliteration is the fact that it's definitely grindcore, it's punky. Every track there are some that are slightly longer than others, but they're generally quite short and sweet, keeping in that style and that vein. Every track is like a strong social, political statement, and the whole album has that kind of feel. It has a real punk vibe to it, but it is clearly drawing and soaking up I guess at that time still quite underground expansion and explosion of extreme music. You know, there was a lot of things happening in America as there was in Scandinavia and here in the UK as well. We were getting this very punk-driven, very, very raw, nasty sounding grindcore and death metal. And there's some absolutely fantastic tracks on this album. It kicks off with a very strange sort of doomy, heavy intro track, Evolved as One, which is definitely more of an intro piece. It's a strong, powerful statement before we're just basically launched through 25 other tracks, which are ranging from seconds long up to maybe a couple of minutes. I think the title track, From Enslavement to Obliteration, is about 2 minutes long in total. But there's some absolute belters on this album that, regardless of where you are, what you're doing, you know, this is probably not a safe album to listen to while you're trying to trim the hedges out the front there. I wouldn't recommend operating any power tools when listening to an album like this because it gets you moving. I've never had the pleasure of seeing Napalm Death live. Unfortunately, they're one of the bands that's always eluded me. But I would love to see Napalm, and I would love to experience the sheer energy of Napalm live. And imagine seeing this band, Napalm, in their earlier years where they were given this sort of material. It must have been absolutely insane. The energy must have been electric. But we get some absolute belters here. We get the wonderful Lucid Fairy Tale, which is a bit of a better known track from this album. Of course, with an album that's packed full of short and sweet tracks, it is a little bit more challenging to pick out real distinguishing moments. But the riffs, the frickin' riffs on a track like Lucid Fairy Tale, totally paving the way for Carcass, totally paving the way, of course, for Recapitulafaction. Absolutely killer stuff, love it. Private Death is another one, it's just riff city. The best track on the album, in my opinion, has to be Unchallenged Hate. That riff is just monstrous. It's an absolute monster of a track, monster of a riff. I absolutely love it. We've got the great cock rock Alienation on here, which is a beast. We've got Think for a Minute. The title track is very good, as is Blind to the Truth. As I say, a lot of these tracks are very punk orientated. They've got a real socio-political awareness here, and that kind of punk style, it's just so full of energy. It's quite simplistic. I'll say that this album is not overly complicated, despite the fact that Bill Steer, he's an excellent player, and the whole band, clearly they were writing some good stuff. It's not, you know, easy cheap wins or anything like that. They're well structured short songs. But Bill, legendary guitarist, a great player, still, he's producing some chuggy riffs that are easily palatable, easy to enjoy. Maybe not initially when you first listen to it, or maybe some people are. Maybe some metalheads would pick this up, or extreme music fans would pick this up, listen to it for the first time, and absolutely fall in love with it. Took me a little while, but it's worth it. It's worth persevering. Then we've got some other great ones, including Practice What You Preach is another beastly track. Mentally Murdered is an excellent number. Make Way, Dead, and then we get another kind of dismal kind of outro succession. It's heavy stuff. It's freaking heavy. But it's great. I absolutely love it. As I say, it's taken me a while to get into this album, but over the last 5 or 6 years, I've really come to love it. I love it. It's so energetic. When I feel like I need a boost of death grind energy, all over that. All over From Enslavement to Obliteration. And it has actually grown to become a bit of a favourite from Napalm's catalogue for me. But I did allude to this with the mention of the previous Metal Head to Head, where I put the debut album, Eaten Back to Life, featuring, of course, Chris Barnes, the legendary Chris Barnes on vocals. I put that against George Corpse Grinder Fisher's debut album, Vile. Put that head to head together. So we're going to put From Enslavement to Obliteration up against the follow-up album and debut to feature the mighty Mark Barney Greenway, such a fantastic vocalist. From 1990, we have Harmony Corruption. Now, this album, I absolutely adore this album. I really, really do. I think that there's continuity in its sound, in the fact that it still sounds like Napalm Death. There's been some big changes in those couple of years, definitely. And it still sounds like Napalm Death, but there's clear change. They have clearly evolved quite considerably. So we've now got Barney on vocals at this point. Still got Mick, the Tornado Harris, on drums. Shane Embury and his rumbling, rattling bass that he plays like a rhythm guitar. Then we've got Mitch Harris now on guitars, alongside the late great Jesse Pintado. Fantastic guitar duo. Those guys were chugging out riffs like there's no tomorrow. Amazing. Absolutely freaking amazing. The other quite notable thing about Napalm Death's Harmony Corruption is the sound of the album. So, if you're not aware, this album was actually produced by Scott Burns. None other than Scott Burns. In fact, this might have even been bang in the right time and place, of course. Yeah. Recorded and mixed at Morrisounds Recordings, Tampa, Florida. Not really much you need to add to that. If you know anything about Florida death metal and the explosion of that mighty movement and that sound, Morrisound Studio, you know, that place, that was the crucible of death metal. All those great bands, Morbid Angel, Obituary, Deicide, Cannibal Corpse, the list goes on. And across the Atlantic, you know, we had bands like Cancer and Napalm Death also flooding in to get their stuff, given that amazing touch, that Florida death metal touch in there. And although Harmony Corruption still sounds like Napalm, it does definitely bear a lot of characteristics of the Florida death metal sound, or the US death metal sound, as it was exploding outside of Florida. And this was one of the first Napalm albums that I absolutely loved. I think this album, alongside the follow-up Utopia Banished, of course, and I seem to remember leaping to Order of the Leech as well, which I actually regarded as one of the first underrated albums which I reviewed in that series. Of course, more recently, I've classed the Fear, Emptiness, Despair album as a bit of an underrated gem in Napalm Death's catalogue. But we're going head to head with these two albums. Firstly, because From Enslavement to Obliteration is a benchmark grindcore album. It's a benchmark album, high point in that kind of death grind crossover music, in my opinion. It's also one of the most renowned and popular Napalm Death albums. It's a classic. And then we've got this album, Harmony Corruption, which is essentially Napalm transitioning into more of a death metal death grind band. But the result, maybe it's a big leap, but the result is phenomenal. I absolutely adore this album, as I say. It is start to finish, so this is an expanded reissue. Again, Earache have done a nice job with this. Whole live set we've got here at the ICA London, 29th of June 1990. And includes a good range of tracks from the first two albums, of course, but 11 tracks, and all of them are excellent I would say old school death metal with a strong grind injection there. We kick off with Vision Conquest, which is a strong opening statement for the album. Not one of the best tracks from the album, no, granted, but a strong opening statement. We're greeted by Barney's excellent vocals. He is a fantastic vocalist, and he always has been, right from the Benediction days. You know, that his work with Benediction was great, I think. Subconscious Terror is a great album. And then we've got his powerful vocals combined with the riffs of Jesse and Mitch, and of course Shane, driven by Mick's drums. It freaking works. It's an absolute bulldozer. And I think these still sounds great on the latter albums. Albums like Apex Predator, which is a bit of a favourite from the more latter years, we should say, or the more recent albums from Napalm. I think he sounds freaking brilliant. He sounds like a madman. And here, he sounds more like a old school death metal vocalist, definitely. One of the best tracks has to be the second track, If the Truth Be Known. Again, the riffs that are coming through there, and the power and the energy, that's very much showing the roots of Napalm Death. Definitely. It's got that energy and that character, that kind of punk vibe there. Inner Incineration, death metal, old school death metal, Florida death metal, whatever, just excellent death metal. Malicious intent. We've got these strong social political kind of vibes coming through there again, and it works. Unfit Earth is outright old school Florida death metal, and I love it. I mean, how much more proof do we need that it's an old school Florida death metal track, other than having guest appearances from none other than Glenn Benton of Deicide, and of course John Tardy from the legendary Obituary, who I actually saw in Colchester the other evening. So, amazing album through and through, but the progress just continues here. We've got Circle of Hypocrisy, again, a great album, maybe not a highlight as such, but The Chains That Bind Us is a beast, an absolute monster of a track. Freaking the riffs, it is just delightful. I know this is probably remastered or it's had little touch-ups over the years, maybe, don't know. Could just be the longevity of Scott Burns touching this music. It's just amazing. Sounds freaking brilliant. I absolutely love it. Mind Snare, another killer track that is firmly rooted in the old style. The early kind of, I'm reaching back to the debut with Scum here. There's the title track Scum, similarities there, I think, in those riffs and that energy. You just want to get flailing around. I've never been one for getting in the mosh pit as such, but I probably would have to with a track like that. Extremity Retained is a great one. Then we've got Suffer the Children. Suffer the Children is one of the best Napalm Death songs. Period. Absolutely. An all-time classic track, an all-time masterpiece. Some of the catchiest freaking riffs ever written in extreme metal. That rhythm, that riff, man, I can't describe. Words fail to explain just how good that riff and how good that track is. And with Barney's vocals and Mick's whirlwind drumming, the whole thing works like a dream. And then the album closes quite powerfully but rapidly with Hiding Behind. A great way to close. The whole album is just so good. It's heavy. I think the real standouts are Barney's vocals and that rhythm section riffs. Amazing. The whole thing coated with that Morris Sounds Studios sound. It's a glorious album. But which is better? Which do I prefer? Of course, this is entirely based on my own opinion, and this isn't necessarily a case of which album's better, but it's which album do I prefer. And of course, I want to hear other thoughts and opinions on this. Get involved. What do you prefer? What's your personal favourite? Is it from Enslavement To Obliteration, or is it Harmony Corruption? So these albums and this idea has been rattling around in my head for a few weeks now, and it's been going back and forth, actually, which just shows how much From Enslavement has grown on me over the years. But unfortunately, I think that despite its brilliance and its significance and its energy, I think there is still something about Harmony Corruption that just draws me back in. And if I could only take one of these two to a desert island, or more appropriately, if these two albums had to fight to the death in a cage, then I still think that the beastliness of Harmony Corruption would prevail. Harmony Corruption, for me, takes that top spot. It's the winner. It's taken the first top spot on that podium. And I think with good reason. For all the reasons that I've mentioned, it's a death metal, death grind masterpiece. It was slap bang, right place, right time. It's had a massive influence, as has From Enslavement and Scum, and of course Utopia Banished, from Fear, Emptiness, Despair, rather. You know, they've all been influential albums to varying degrees. I think Napalm Death is just one of the most influential and important bands in extreme music because of the grindcore, because of the death grind, because of the death metal, to the very experimental and avant-garde stuff that they've been doing in more recent years. Napalm Death have never, although they've they've retained quite a lot of their personality and identity and sound and style. They've never been completely pigeonholable, if that makes sense. They've always done something a little bit different. But for me, Harmony Corruption does win. I would still say that tracks like Lucid Fairy Tale, Unchallenged Hate, From Enslavement to Obliteration, Mentally Murdered, Social Sterility, these are great tracks. And it's just some of those riffs. Some of those riffs are just delicious, absolutely amazing. And if you stuck some of those riffs head to head with some of the riffs from Jesse and Mitch duo, I don't know. I think Bill would fend pretty well with his riffs there. But there's just something about Harmony Corruption. It just draws me back in. And if I was going to pick just a couple of tracks to really justify that decision, that final result and outcome, I'd say If the Truth Be Known, I would say Unfit Earth, and I would say Mind Snare, Suffer the Children. So essentially nearly half of the album. But even if you just picked a couple of tracks from that little selection there, that handful, I think that would be more than enough to justify saying that's one of the best Napalm Death albums. It's one of the best albums from that movement and that time. Give From Enslavement to Obliteration the praise, of course, for just being a benchmark album. And you never know, with successive listens and more time, it might be actually that this changes. Maybe that'll be an idea for the future. Decades from now, maybe I'll revisit these head-to-heads and see if the outcome is still the same. But I would like to know what you think. What is your opinion on this, in this metal head-to-head? Do you prefer From Enslavement to Obliteration, the final album to feature Lee Dorian and Bill Steer from 1988? Or is it 1990s amazing Harmony Corruption with a revitalised and renewed lineup leading the frickin' way for death grind and death metal? What are your thoughts and opinions? Do keep this civilised. This is all just good, harmless fun. This isn't to achieve anything other than talking about metal and getting the conversation going. I'd like to hear your thoughts and opinions, but let's keep this civilised. So, my friends, let me know what you think on this one. What are your thoughts on Napalm Death in general? What are your favourite Napalm albums? Get involved. Very interested to hear, of course, thoughts and opinions of others. Thank you very much for watching, my friends. I hope you've enjoyed this seemingly pointless but harmless review. Humble review, in fact. Thanks for watching and thanks for the support. Please do feel free to like, subscribe, share, comment. It's all very much appreciated. We're steadily growing the channel here and it's all good fun. Do check back soon for more reviews and recommendations of all the good heavy things. I'll link a few reviews and tasters here if you want to check out some more Napalm related videos. But take care of yourselves, my friends, and as always, stay freaking heavy.